So we've started. Hi, welcome. This is the Dance Song Podcast.
Oh, have we?
Yeah, I think we have. Aye.
Yeah, I'll just trim out all that solid gold or gristle, whatever, however you want to look at it.
Horses for courses, I guess.
This is the start, folks. This is the start.
Is the beginning.
This is the hot start.
It ends. Sorry, it starts here. I am Mark Fraser. I'm joined by the venerable Chris Cusack and the delectable Craig Carrick.
Is venerable not sort of tied in with age? Is that like a backhanded compliment saying that I'm old?
It means respected, man.
You have a shiny veneer. I think that's what the etymology of it. And I'm delectable, Mark. It must be this.
What's that? Those moustache. It's not moustache.
Delectable has a hint of this sort of creepy sort of young man.
It does, yeah.
And actually, talking about paedophilia, is it safe to mention
coming in hot?
So the royal funeral, talking about old things and paedophilia. What brings together old age and paedophilia better than the royal funeral? So the Queen died. Craig, I bet nobody in Australia gives much of a fuck. Did I not see a video of somebody cracking open a bottle of champagne on the nighttime news?
It's a funny one in Australia because all the kind of TV outlets and stuff like that are all covering it, and most of them are screwing it up, to be honest. So here's what it's like. What's the new Prime Minister called?
Liz Truss.
Liz Truss.
So she was identified on the news yesterday as possibly a minor royal after she'd kind of went through, and it's like that's actually the Prime Minister. But yeah, in Australia it's quite different. Obviously, I've been in mourning because she's my queen. I'm a loyal subject. That's what the Australians. But it's a bit like Brexit voters. You know, they walk among us.
Yeah.
You know they're out there. I heard some things as well, and if dear listener out there is wondering why this episode is late, it's probably because of all the mourning you guys were doing.
Much mourning.
I was mourning my tits off, man.
I had a theory that you guys were in the queue, which I've only heard about. I don't know if it's true. So someone told me that they've split it up into, it's like 12 miles long, and they've split it up into different holding paddocks, and they're called QE1, QE2 and QE3, and I don't know if that's true or not, but
that was not true, but I wish it was true.
It's hilarious. As someone who comes from Clydebank where the QE2 was built, my granda worked on, I'm like, I'm going to go and do it for my granda.
Well, we need to get this show out the road so I can get back to mourning, because there's only so many hours in the day.
Do you want to hear a fact about the British Civil Service response to the 12 days of mourning? Anybody that was public facing had to wear black for the entire 12 days.
Well, do you want to know something? Well, I was actually crossing the border when it was announced that she died, and then I was in London the evening that everybody was suddenly realising and finding out, and it was a very, very surreal experience. And then I was outside the gates of Buckingham Palace the next morning, just out of pure macabre interest. I happened to be down there. I've been down to London a few times in the last 2 years, and I suspected I was going to be there when it happened, and I was sort of right. So I just went down there sort of like a kind of weird anthropological David Attenborough to just look at the kind of people that bring marmalade sandwiches and flowers to the gates of Buckingham Palace in flocks. I was near St James's when Charles was confirmed, or whatever that's called as well. It was weird. I didn't wish the old bird any personal harm, but the whole fucking institution's an absolute travesty.
It's kicking off a bit in Australia, talking about that as well. With so there's a day of mourning, which is tomorrow, public holiday, before public holiday for the AFL Grand Final, which is just ridiculous anyway. So the coloniser gets a holiday because they did, and then they're like renaming a hospital after like which has an indigenous name, and people are just up in arms about it, justifiably so, because things are not better but getting better, and then
there's a step backwards.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe we can swap them. So we've got the Queen Elizabeth now, though. That's a new one. We could change the name of that to whatever that hospital was.
Yeah,
and then that's fair.
Marupna. If I get that totally wrong, you can edit it, but I think it means lush and fertile land, like it used to be before.
Mark, what sums up Govan more than lush and fertile land?
The Rabsy Nesbitt wing.
The listeners to this show will have spent the last fuck knows how many days absolutely swamped with coverage of the royal funeral, and they probably are like, guys, I'm up for the banter, but I'm so fucking sick of the royal funeral that I can't even stand it on this podcast, so we will push past it. Mark, do we have any admin to do? So I change the subject?
No. let's think of some real quick. So we are still sourcing some great records for our record club, so if you haven't already signed up to it, you should definitely do that at patreon.com/unsung. We've just got a whole bunch of new stuff.
Yeah, a total ripper from down south, band from London. We're going to do an episode pretty soon where we start doing little kind of mini things where we look at the records that are part of the record club. But yeah, there's a couple of total belters arrived recently.
Yeah, so you should definitely get in on that, because we are still looking for more as well. So it's an ever expanding collection of fucking banging music. And another thing which we're asking for, and we have been asking for a while, is demos. And one Mr. James.
Oh, Craig, look at that face. This is the moment of.
This is it. He's waiting for it. He's been penting up for fucking months. But
I just forgot all about it.
Mr. James Reichheld had sent us his demo. I haven't listened to it yet, but he said the demos that you've had so far are far, far, far too good. So I've sent you one of my first proper band, and it's quite tragic.
Got to admire that. That's good sportsmanship. So yeah. Craig, this is your chance, man, to get us back. You heard what we did to your demo. You heard that episode.
Not that anyone cares.
Full sex.
The statute of limitations runs out, and I think it's about 22 years old. That.
Full sex, Craig. Full sex. Was I right about that?
Yeah, it was. There was like a hand signal that went with it. It was just basically patter about like, how can this be the best it can be when you're like a wee guy and you probably just started having sex. It was just like you know, and if something was like really good, instead of saying it was really good, we just be like, aye, Queenseed, full sex. Something like that. But aye. Antics band.
Well done for submitting to the process. So Craig, we put you in charge of the selection for this week, and you came up with something that was challenging but also kind of pretty early on. I think we got the sense it was a bit special. Do you want to talk us through it a wee bit?
So we're going to talk about Donny, and I think everyone in the UK or the US, even when you think about Donny, you probably think about Darko, Wahlberg, or even Teen Idol, Donny Osmond. So, but we're talking about Donny Hathaway.
Keep your self-respect, your manly pride.
I think he's a special artist who really fits that unsung definition. And we're going back to that 60s, 70s era with me once again. To look at Donny Hathaway, the choice I've made is a compilation of rarities recorded across a few venues over a couple of years. It's called These Songs for You Live, and this is one that was released in 2004. And in my eyes, it's I think his work is a bit of a blueprint for modern R&B. And this is one, when I brought it up, I don't think you guys had heard of him, and it might be the same for a lot of people listening to this, which is a shame because he was a genius. I'm unsure if you guys are buying it though, if you're into it. You guys keep pretty tight-lipped on your thoughts before we record. Had you guys heard of Donny Hathaway?
Well, in the interest of disambiguation, I'd heard of Donny Hathaway, who's the feminist author of Our Bodies Should End at the Skin and I Am a Cyborg fame, so it's definitely not her, is what I've discovered. No, I'd never actually heard of Donny Hathaway, or if I had, it wasn't a name that I'd really registered, so I knew I had my work cut out. I mean, a bit like a lot of genres, there are only a few artists of this genre that I tend to spend any time with. You know, I've always kind of been like that with whether it's metal or soul or electro. I kind of pick a few from them that I'm really into, and then I can usually disregard the bulk of it.
You're a big Mayfield guy, aren't you? Oh no, you're a Sam Cooke guy, isn't it? Yeah.
Sam Cooke for me. I mean, Sam Cooke for me is literally the best vocalist I've ever heard. I absolutely adore it.
Your heart beating fast, you knowing that time will pass, but hoping that it lasts.
And so my references, or my reference points, are a little bit limited. So you might notice that in my notes, but I tried really, really hard to engage with it.
No, I had never really heard of Donny Hathaway before either, to be honest. But yeah, you can hear his DNA in R&B for the past 40 years. I think he was kind of unfortunate in the era that he arrived in. You know, there's a lot of stellar, really well known R&B and soul singers that he just, for one reason or another, just never ever managed to get in with, even though he worked for Curtis Mayfield and stuff like that, and was clearly a very talented player, not just singer, but composer, arranger, keys player as well. I really enjoy getting to know him, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion about his oeuvre.
Can I just offer a really early speculation on that issue as to why this guy with all his evident talent didn't make it? We'll go into this in a lot more depth, but he died really quite young. He died at 33 years old by suicide, after also having a protracted period of really bad mental health that led to him doing almost nothing for the best part of 4 or 5 years. And given that he really only kicked on in 1970 and he was dead by 79, and you've got to put about 4 or 5 years of inactivity into the middle of that, I think that's really the basic reason that he didn't go up a level, because these other artists were extremely prolific for long periods of time and were able to keep growing. He had a lot of respect, and he still does. We'll talk about that, but I honestly think in his case it's something as simple as just life circumstances, health, and then the early death that led to him not fulfilling that sort of potential in terms of fame. So maybe we can set that right.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. But there's a few songs that he wrote which are like absolute legendary classics, which are been covered by numerous artists, but just never really caught on the same way as What's Going On did, and other fucking Stevie Wonder song.
Those guys had multiple albums earlier on in their careers that hadn't quite clicked, and Donny only had 3 studio albums. So let's go through a little bit of the backstory first, and then we'll get into his catalogue.
Yeah, so Donny Hathaway was a singer, pianist, producer, composer, arranger, born Donny Edward Pitts on October 1st, 1945 in Chicago, Illinois. He was raised in kind of housing projects and then got moved to St. Louis, Missouri. And was raised essentially by his grandmother, who was actually quite a famous gospel singer called Martha Pitts. And at the age of 3, young Donny started singing in the church choir alongside his granny, and started learning the piano. And then by 6 years old, he was composing his own music, singing and playing the piano professionally under the name Donny Pitts, the nation's youngest gospel singer. That's pretty young to be at all that as well. So he was a piano prodigy before he even got to high school. And in 1964, he got a full scholarship to attend Howard University, where he met his wife and mother of a couple of his kids. And he also met Roberta Flack, who I'm sure we'll talk about later, who is a bit of a prodigy in her own right as well. Short version of it as well is kids on the way, gets married, has to go out and get some work, make some money. So he starts as a session musician and songwriter for labels like Chess Records. And then he does arrangements for people like the staple singers, Curtis Mayfield.
I'm your daddy, I'm that nigga in the alley. I'm your doctor when you need. Want some coke, have some weed. You know me, I'm your friend, your main boy, thick and thin. I'm your pusher man.
Gets a job at a place called Curtom Records in 1969 and does his first single, I Thank You Baby, a duet with a lass called June Conquest.
She said thank you when she didn't have a dime, 'cause she knew that the man upstairs.
Later on, he got signed to a subsidiary of Atlantic. I think it's called Atco or APCO, one of the two. Sorry, it's top of my head. As a solo artist, and he released a debut single, The Ghetto Part 1. Which did alright, got to number 23 in R&B charts and established him really. And then his critically acclaimed record Everything Is Everything and hit single This Christmas followed in 1970. That's probably the one you're talking about as being a classic, Mark, this Christmas, because it comes around once a year, every year since back then.
See that early period when he was trying to find work, as you say, you know, he was married in 1967 and had 2 daughters. By the way, his 2 daughters still work in music.
10 Grammy nominations and 5 Grammy wins is one of his
daughter Lila. His daughter Lila's like technically more successful than him.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about Grammys and record sales and stuff like that.
So in that period when he went to work at Curtom, which was Curtom Records was Curtis Mayfield's imprint.
Yeah.
He actually became sort of their in-house guy, like their in-house writer, producer, engineer, and as a result of that was working with, writing for, honing his craft alongside some, whilst maybe not household names, you know, successful names in the industry, and really growing into himself as a songwriter. And it was, as you say, like a good few years, or at least 2 or 3 years before he pulled the trigger on his own releases, that I Think You Baby. There's also a B-side in that I think for fans of him is quite well known, Just Another Reason.
But all's not hopeless when you're looking for a true love.
No, not anymore. Although the boy's so sweet next to you now.
Also a duet with June Conquest. So he landed having spent some time in the trenches. He landed knowing his craft, knowing how to play, knowing how to sing, but also knowing how to compose. He's spoken at length about wanting to absorb really diverse influences into his compositions. I think even at the end of the record we're going to talk about, there's a brief interview where he talks about listening to the entire gamut of music from blues to classical. So he's a guy steeped in music.
And that was always the lore around him, you know. Very, very famous people, you know. Not just your, you know, Jerry Wexlers and Quincy Jones and all that, but his peers, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder and all that, they'd be like, this guy was just the guy. He could just hum a tune and he'd have a composition. But then he was a producer also as well. So just ticked every box and played like a demon, sung like an angel, and just incredible. And it just blew everyone away. So I think when he did get signed, it was, what was it? They called it the Free Geniuses. I think it was either Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder and Aretha Franklin and this guy.
Yeah, it was Jerry Wexler that said that, wasn't it?
Yeah. And this is like, you know, if you're putting this guy up there on that pedestal so publicly, it's a shame that he's so unsung, you know, that people haven't heard of him.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that so many people held him in high regard. You know, Rolling Stone magazine have referred to him as a soul legend, and I think in one of their polls he was adjudged to be the 49th best singer of all time, which, okay, 49th is a big number in that sense, but if you think about it, in the huge number of incredible voices that will be on that list, that's amazing. Craig, your favourite, Paul Weller, he really agrees with you. He's quoted as saying, I don't know how recognised he is, but for me he's up with the greats. Maybe not as consistent as Stevie Wonder, but in terms of talent, definitely. Justin Timberlake calls him the best singer of all time. Stevie Wonder himself is quoted as saying, when Donny sings any song, he owns it. And reputedly Amy Winehouse, he was her favourite singer.
Yeah, she did a live version of one of your songs, and it's in our final our posthumous collection.
Said I love you more than you ever know, more than you ever know.
And she says at the end of the recording that somebody's really, really great, but Donny Hathaway is the best singer of all time. I can't remember who it was she said. That's going to fucking annoy me.
It was high praise, that's for sure.
So you mentioned This Christmas, and This Christmas has been covered by, to name a few, Diana Ross, Aretha Franklin, The Temptations, The Four Tops, Stevie Wonder.
And this Christmas will be a very special Christmas.
This Christmas, the fireside is blazing bright. We're caroling
This Christmas, and as we trim the tree, how much fun. This Christmas, fireside is blazing bright.
Christina Aguilera, Chicago, Harry Connick Jr. NSYNC, Gloria Estefan, Chris Brown, Patti LaBelle, Mary J. Blige, Seal, Train, CeeLo Green, and a lot more that I just couldn't be bothered including in that list. So that's high praise in and of itself. And that tune actually made an appearance on his second record. It was reissued with that added as a bonus track. But his first record, 1970, included that tune, The Ghetto Part 1, that you'd mentioned earlier. That's his first proper studio album. Everything is Everything. One of only 3 in total, as we mentioned. For me, I found that album a little raw, a little inconsistent, and a bit lacking in identity, but it had some really nice moments in it. What did you make of it?
You're right. It's his first crack at it, and it's never going to be perfect. And as you said about how prolific people were in these days as well, like when there actually was a music industry, you know, Happy Birthday by Stevie Wonder's from his 19th album or something like that, you know? It's like, imagine having 19 albums or something like that. So this is number 1. It's not a bad shot. And it's...
You can tell that he did that time beforehand learning his craft, I think, because it is more well realised than you would maybe expect it to be. But yeah, the prolific thing is an issue, because we've talked about bands in this, like Beach Boys, who were putting out 4 records a year, and that wasn't that uncommon for these kind of artists, you know, and this guy only managed 3 studio albums, albeit his life was cut short.
Yeah, I mean, I think The Ghetto is a fucking fantastic song, and it's really ballsy to release it as your first single, and it has like very little vocals. I think the lead vocal on that track is actually sung by his wife. His daughter does make an appearance in it as well, like screaming, because I think she was
as a baby
in the studio at the time.
It's people talk about that in really high regard as well. Obviously something as free white cisgendered males can't really relate to, kind of thing, but they're like, yeah, he's singing about the ghetto, he's singing about where we come from, and he's saying you can be proud of it as well. And that seems to be the message that comes from a lot of these kind of sound bites that you hear about Donny Hathaway from people who say changed the game. Might have been ahead of his time, who knows.
Yeah, I mean, he really lived it as well. He grew up in the projects of St. Louis, you know. The second record that he brought out, the second studio album, the self-titled Donny Hathaway from 1971, largely covers a mixture of pop, gospel and soul classics. I really liked this one. This for me was where the guy kind of clicked. I'd been kind of going at his catalogue in a fairly disorganised fashion, I have to admit. But this was the one where I was like, oh, right, I really hear something here. I think I'm starting to know what makes this guy stand out from the pack. The opener on that one, Giving Up.
When you still depend upon her warm and tender touch,
which was originally, I think, popularised by Gladys Knight and the Pips, written by a guy called Van McCoy.
Giving up is hard to do when you really love someone.
That, I thought, is that's a terrific song. Really good, really soulful, really touching and emotional. I think maybe by virtue of the number of cover versions that are on it, I think as a record it seems to look backwards in time a little to an era of gospel infused pop and soul, which would include the kind of era of like peak Motown by my own tastes, rather than forwards to the sort of 70s funk and the kind of smarmy soul that followed in the mid to late 70s, which is a sound that really leaves me cold. And it does appear in his catalogue, and that's when I'm really like uninvolved. But this period I quite liked.
Yeah, he managed to avoid disco as well.
I was going to say his version of a song for you, I think, could be the definitive version for me.
You taught me precious secrets of a true love, holding nothing. You came out in front when I was high.
That's a great song. That's a classic anyway, but his vocal on it is just impeccable. There's just so much emotion in this. It's both the singing and the piano playing in that song. I think it's just a fantastic cover, and that's the song Amy Winehouse covered. It was his version specifically, and she said that in the recording of it, and I think it is pretty much untouchable as an untouchable version of that song, to be honest. And it's been covered by a lot of fucking people, including Ray Charles, and Whitney Houston.
Yeah, it's some big swings for sure.
The following year, 72, was a really big year for him professionally, because it included both his greatest commercial success and I think what is probably his most celebrated work overall. He worked with Roberta Flack, the person who you mentioned he met in Washington DC at college.
Killing me softly with his song, killing me softly with his song, telling my whole life with his words, killing me softly.
On Roberta Flack and Donny Hathaway 1972 album. I think this one really made an impact in the pop charts. It didn't just dominate the R&B charts, but it actually went into the top 100 with a splash. Where Is the Love? The track broke into the top 5 nationwide and ended up selling over 1 million copies. There's other select prominent moments on it. You've Got a Friend, Baby I Love You, You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling, really famous covers that he took a pretty strong stab at.
All you have to do is call and I'll be there. You got a friend.
On that record, I really like Be Black For Me. Yeah, Be Real Black For Me, sorry, yeah.
You don't have to wear false charm, 'cause when I wrap you in my hungry arms, be real.
I think that's a cracking song. I was listening to that just before this recording, actually, and I think that's a really, really good song, as well as, of course, Where Is the Love, which is, I think, pretty untouchable, to be honest. I think the 70s is obviously mired in a lot of those kind of lovey-dovey male-female soul duets. For me, this record's mostly about him giving his voice more than anything else. His composition and his arrangement and his songwriting isn't really on this record very much at all, to be honest. But I do think that perhaps Where Is the Love is maybe one of the best soul songs of the era. And the other cut that I said there, Be Real Black For Me, that's one of the only songs on the record that he wrote with Roberta Flack. There's only 2 original songs on that record, that and Where Love Has Grown. And You Got a Friend as well. Fuck, I forgot that was on it. That's also cracking. It's a good song anyway, but it's a really good cover.
Yeah, he was really well known for his covers. Like you were saying, Stevie Wonder said it's like if he plays one of your songs, then it's lights out, and it's not your song anymore. So he was, So on the chronology, he was doing some work for film and TV as well around this time, Chris. Yeah,
he did a TV show. He did at least one movie, I think, and was dabbling around with some more slightly cinematic sounds based on his love of classical music. Yeah,
it was a comeback Charleston Blue, which he did with Quincy Jones. I've not seen the film, but the standout for me is actually the song it does on the record that we're covering.
Will you spend your days and nights in a pool room? Will you sell cans of madness to the neighborhood little ghetto boy?
The live version of A Little Ghetto Boy is obviously on the record we're doing, but
I think that the notion of covers, like, obviously there's some quite like covers in this, but this is like the music industry as it was back then. There was songwriters, there was performers, there was arrangers, composers, all this kind of thing, and most of the time the writers that's just what they did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was also very above ground. I think we've mentioned that in the past, like that whole Tin Pan Alley thing. The notion of someone writing a song for an artist was a common practice, but it was acknowledged and understood. I think what we have now is a deception where there's the kid on that the artist wrote it because it contributes to their brand, and that's the aspect that I think really differs. But yeah, you're right. Like the idea of a cover isn't entirely accurate. We actually spoke about it on Unsong, Mark, when we covered the Temptations, because Papa Was a Rolling Stone, that wasn't the original version, but the original writers felt that the original release didn't get it right, so they wanted to redo it with somebody else to try and get it closer to their vision. So it was quite a common practice, wasn't it? Talking about covers as well, in 1972, again, busy year, Live came out, and that's what I mean by saying that's probably his most celebrated work overall.
Yeah.
A singular live album, critically lauded.
Can see what's going on. Hey, yeah, what's going on? I wanna know what's going on.
Perhaps the highlight of his creative legacy, Darryl Easley of BBC in 1989 referred to it as one of the best live albums ever recorded, much closer to present day. It got props in the Quietus. It was included in their 40 greatest live albums as voted by the writers. The record was actually compiled from recordings of 2 concerts. It then went out of print, and at least it was until fairly recently. I'm not sure if it's still out of print, and I wondered if this partly inspired your choice, Craig, because the album you've picked actually takes cuts from this album. It takes cuts from In Performance, which is a later live album, and then it adds in a whole bunch of rare and previously unreleased stuff as well.
It does completely. That live album was my inroad to Donny Hathaway. It was his cover of Jealous Guy, a John Lennon song.
I began to lose control. I didn't mean to hurt you.
Which
I was
is
about to mention that. Yeah, the kind of honky-tonk piano version, which is great.
yeah, it's amazing.
It's fantastic.
I heard it in a pizza joint. There was like a kind of a hip pizza joint, and they had a vinyl DJ, and I was like, who the hell is this? I got a couple of deep cuts that night with some A Cantina stuff I'd never heard from like their 27th album. There was but yeah, that's where I first heard Donny Hathaway quite a long time ago now.
It's a really good cover. It's interesting that it didn't appear on the 2004 release that we're covering, actually. I know it appeared elsewhere eventually, but I don't know if that's just because there was already a Beatles track included in this.
Yeah, that's why I chose this one, just because it was just to turn you guys on a bit more to more of his stuff, because there's more on it. It was about 12 tracks or something on this one versus about 8 or 9 on live. So it was just to expose a bit more.
So as you mentioned, he was doing TV and film scoring, a couple of bits and bobs on the side. In 73, he brought out his third and what would prove to be his final solo album, which is amazing when you consider what a short window of time that is. He basically had 3 years to do a solo career, with the album Extension of a Man. I laboured with this record a bit because in first listen, I don't know why, but it was just registering as a sort of proto-Lionel Richie to me. It was like getting into that 70s weird kind of smooth soul stuff that really turns me off. I wasn't really taken with it, the kind of waka 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 kind of guitar thing. But then going back to it, I realised that there really were a couple of cracking bits of music on it. I Know It's You, I think, so a really nice tune. Two of the successful songs on it, Love, 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 It's Okay, whereas I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know, which was the other kind of separate release from this album, is a terrific song.
Said I love you more than you'll ever know.
I don't think the version on this album is the best version of it, but it's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
That's another one that you can see Amy Winehouse doing to great effect as well. I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know.
I actually think I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know, especially the live version that we're going to talk about later, I can actually hear Portishead in that. I know they're a fan of this era of music.
It's in my notes.
Yeah. So, the other places in the album, like I say, though, it does take a kind of turn towards that sort of sleazy kind of like click your fingers, smooth soul jazz that would then go on into the 80s, and I just fucking hate that shit. I mean, it's funny in a comedic sense if you're trying to have a laugh at a party and put on something cheesy in the background, but musically it just doesn't work for me.
We drink the breezes as we drink wine, and the nectar is sweet. Now the feeling we have is fine. We're flying easy, drifting on a
that record also has a couple of interesting extended instrumental pieces. There was a re-release of it as well, posthumously, and the liner notes included some interesting bits and bobs, including a note that said Donny literally sat in the studio and cried when he heard the playback of his final mix. It's pretty special when an artist can create something that wipes them out. So yeah, I mean, it's an album that, as I say, at first listen I was a bit, I don't know about this one, but it definitely has some really, really good stuff in it, as well as a bunch of stuff that I just could totally have quite happily lived without.
I think Someday We'll All Be Free is one of his most well-known songs and well-covered songs as well.
hang on to the world as it spins around. Just
It is, that song doesn't massively connect to me. I noticed that it did get a lot of praise.
Like it got adopted. It's been covered by everyone, but I think Aretha Franklin covered it for the Malcolm X soundtrack, the Denzel Washington movie.
Take it from me, someday we'll all be free.
All right, okay.
But a lot of people speculate he's talking about his own demons and thinking someday we'll all be free, because he had all these other theories, which I'm sure we'll touch on probably now.
Well, that's it, yeah. So, as we say, 73 Extension of a Man was his last studio album. And then he has this huge black hole in his creative output from 73 until 77, when his mental health, quote, wreaked havoc, including leading to several incidences of hospitalisation. We'll maybe go on to discuss that specifically very shortly, but just to close off in his catalogue, he re-emerged again in 1978 as part of Roberta Flack's album Blue Lights in the Basement, on a tune called The Closer I Get to You.
love in a special way.
The closer I get to you.
That tune actually got to number 2 in the charts overall. It was really successful. He managed to release one more solo single, You Were Meant for Me.
Never thought I'd be so happy. Loving you.
It was released by Atlantic in 78. That came out just shortly prior to his death. And he had an abandoned session for a new solo record in January 1979, which we'll get to when we're talking about the mental health issues. His last recorded work was released posthumously in the form of Roberta Flack's Roberta Flack featuring Donny Hathaway album. That was originally intended as their second full duet record, but he died after completing just 2 tracks, Back Together Again, the title of which I guess is a bit on the nose, and You Are My Heaven, which was his last complete recording.
You are my heaven. You are my love. Make me sing la-di-da. You are my love. You are my heaven.
And that was him, you know, January 1979, age of 33, extinguished by his own hand. Mental health was a huge issue in the career of Donny Hathaway, and you know, we said it earlier on, I think one of the reasons he's not a household name alongside some of those that we have discussed is simply just because he didn't get the chance. He had 3 records, he had a couple of live things out there, a couple of collaborations, but so many people thought so highly of him, and you suspect he probably would have gone on to work with a lot of them, and it just was never realised. I mean, even he and Roberta Flack drifted very, very far apart during his battles with mental health, and that was only reconciled towards the end of his life, and that enabled them to work together again. His mental health inflicted a lot of stress and anguish on his family. In 1971, he'd been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and eventually became heavily medicated. I think it was 14 different medications he had to take twice daily at one point. The thing is, though, the medications were actually proven to be quite effective. His family say that one of the issues was that Donny was not entirely diligent at taking them, especially when he started to notice improvements. He would say, "Oh, I'm getting better, I don't need these anymore," and then he would renege on his regime and backslide, sometimes very, very, very quickly. As we say, 73 to the start of 78, mental health was so erratic that it basically derailed his musical career. That's when I was reading this story, it really struck a chord for me. As somebody that's had a lot of mental health issues and has gone through treatments that took a while to get there, but ended up being really, really, I wouldn't just say life-changing, I'd say probably life-saving. And I have a wee bit of an issue with the notion of medication and the way it's discussed, especially by people that are on it. I think it's an important discussion to have, because you hear so many anecdotal stories about, I took these and they didn't work, and I took this and it didn't work, and I was better anyway, so I just stopped taking it. And it's so frustrating, because if you apply a sort of scientific rigour to a patient's account of their own experience, they're the least objective person you could possibly ask about that experience. And so you'll have people that are drinking heavily, smoking weed, staying up late, can't sleep too much, have other relationship issues, maybe they have gender issues, gender dysphoria, all these other issues that complicate their medication regime. And alcohol, for example, and drugs totally undermine the pharmaceutical effects of these medications. And reading this about Donny Hathaway and how he was so bad at sticking to that, even though it was shown to help him, that must have been heartbreaking for his family, because they know that he's there, he's within touching distance. They know that it's like, there's Donny, he's having a good period. And then because of that good period, he's like, I'm getting better, I don't need this anymore. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, man. And I've seen that in people. I mean, I've seen it in myself, but I've seen it in people as well, and actually grown really, really frustrated, not just at them for their lack of care and attention to themselves, but also because it helps foster a climate in which people are just automatically sceptical about pharmacology and the benefits of certain medicines and the benefits of speaking with experts and accepting help, and also of just being understanding that doctors are people and they might not get it right first or second time. Some doctors are better than others. It doesn't mean you abandon it, because abandoning it has so many consequences for the people around you. And your heart breaks for Donny Hathaway's family in that scenario, knowing that he was attainable. He could have managed that. I've got friends with schizophrenia. I've seen when those people have not had any help or have rejected help and how bad it gets. Then I've also seen them live fairly normal lifestyles. And you're like, it is doable. I mean, I don't imagine that a musician's lifestyle, especially a fairly successful musician's lifestyle, is conducive to respecting a regime of medication.
It's a bit tropey with creative types as well, where they're saying, if I take the pills, I can't do what I'm supposed to do. I can't unleash that creativity and stuff. It
dampens me down too much.
Yeah, and it's a trope for a reason, and there could be some legitimacy to it. I've got lived experience as well, but
I was going to come in and say that I'm actually, so I've been on medication for a long time, and I'm coming off it now. Obviously with the advice and the help of my doctor, and it has had a serious effect on my creativity. I can definitely say that, but it's the trade-off you need to make in order to live a healthy and happy life.
I've got spinal surgery coming up, and for the nerve pain, they've prescribed me actually antidepressants, which is actually making me more depressed. It's helping with the nerve stuff, like however that pharmacology works, but it's put me in quite a spin, especially when it comes to the creative side of things, which I have to do quite often. Not that I'm bloody Donny Hathaway or something like that, but I'm feeling that going on them, and that's probably what you experience, Mark.
Yeah, And just to kind of add to the Donny Hathaway thing, generally, his wife said that after he was diagnosed, he was in hospital, in and out of hospital a lot as a result of not taking his medication as well. She said he was hospitalised multiple times in 73, 74.
Yeah.
And God knows how many times after that as well. She didn't talk about that, but I'm pretty sure they weren't just one-off occurrences in those 2 years, right? And lead up to his unfortunate death, you know.
He was manic when some of the stuff he was saying was just, he was right on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's about finding the right regime, isn't it? Because there are solutions out there, and even if there isn't a perfect solution, there's an optimal state, you know, because even if it does have certain drawbacks, it also, you hope to get to a state where it's far, far better than unmedicated, or at least without the help of the medication. The medication doesn't cure anything, but the idea is that it helps you stabilise to a point where maybe if there are circumstantial issues, you can improve those, or you can just learn to apply other therapies, you know, holistic therapies, be they, you know, psychotherapy or relaxation, or even just pursuits, you know, mindfulness, things like that. I think that stuff's often really misunderstood, and what doesn't help it is when someone just pops pills for a week and says, I don't feel happy 24 hours a day, these are fucking shit, don't take them. It's a conspiracy by the pharmaceutical industry. And you're like, for fuck's sake, I'm not going to be up here defending the pharmaceutical industry, but there are definite benefits. There's a lot of science, a lot of really hard-working, intelligent people behind these, and they can help. It took me a long time to find the right thing. I don't feel a creative inhibition now resulting from the medication that I used to. That was because it was the wrong medication at the wrong dosage, and you have to address that. And it's not always going to be right for some people. And another issue is also with antidepressants, especially things like SSRIs, because they take a while to come into your system and they take a while to go out your system, and if you're constantly rinsing them out your system with things like alcohol, then you're never actually at a point where they're working properly. It's not like a paracetamol. It's not like you take it and then 30 minutes later you're at optimal effect. It can take weeks and weeks and weeks for them to build up to the level where they actually start to do their job. And the journey there can actually be worse, as you say. The journey there can be pretty harrowing. It can really fuck your sleep and your attention. You know, you can find yourself drifting off in the middle of conversations, but it's a serious medication and it's for a serious condition, and you've got to respect that. And reading this story, man, it was heartbreaking, because the guy's life didn't have to be like that. And especially when I read the bit saying that they did see glimmers of like, this is really helping, you're having a really good period, and then that lapsed, and that's fucking devastating. And so once I knew that about him, going back to listen to this music, it had an extra layer of tragedy to it. Do you know what I mean? It was really, I was finding it at times quite upsetting just to imagine that context. I mean, to conclude the story of Donny Hathaway with that in mind, he had a session arranged for January of 79, intended to lead on to his fourth solo album. His collaborators on that project, Eric Mercury and James Mtume, have since described a guy who, whilst his voice was good, was becoming increasingly irrational to the point of acute paranoia. Mtume said he became convinced that white people were trying to kill him, and they had attached him to a machine, i.e. recording, as a way of stealing his talent and voice. Mercury eventually decided to abort the session altogether. Hathaway then apparently went to have dinner with Roberta Flack at the Dakota Hotel where she was staying, and just a few hours later Hathaway was found dead on the pavement below his hotel. The glass in the room of his window had apparently been carefully removed. There was no sign of struggle. It was ruled a suicide. I'm sure if you check the internet, there's conspiracy theories out there, but that's the internet. Roberta Flack in particular took it really badly, having only recently reconciled with him and also having seen him that day. His funeral was ultimately led by Jesse Jackson, as I think about a testimony to how prominent and respected a figure he'd become in the black community, both just in his achievements and his singing about politics, his addressing of cultural issues. He was a celebrated guy, and it was a horrible, horrible ending that didn't have to be there. Yeah.
And there was actually some recordings that were unearthed in the 2013 as well, and those 13 unreleased tracks, which I haven't heard. It was part of an anthology that was released back then, Never My Love it was called, and it did show that he was still trying to pull stuff together in that period of darkness for him. You know, and it's a shame that it had to come down to what it came down to, really.
By the way, is there not one of the songs in one of his other records that starts with the lyrics, I hear voices? Like, I'm hearing voices, I hear voices. And I know when you don't know the mental health stuff, it can be interpreted as just being a sort of gospel reference, but going back, I found it quite sinister, because I think it was about 1971 or 72 that song came out.
There's one thing I wanted to bring up actually, which was quite an interesting thing that I read, and it relates to the gospel. The gospel point is that apparently he was quite conflicted over which direction to take his music in, because his parents were very religious, and he was kind of torn between sticking to gospel and staying true to those roots, whilst also, you know, pursuing pop music, because that's what he also liked. And he grew quite frustrated about talking to his grandparents about that, because he felt as though he could have a proper conversation about, I guess, Gentile music, I suppose is what it would be.
Yeah. Non-Jewish.
But yeah, so that was there was always a lot of gospel influence, particularly in his singing, obviously, but I thought that was quite interesting that there's clearly a lot of reverence for that.
Yeah, with the religious thing as well, it's something that Roberta Flack commented on as well. Like Chris mentioned, there's tons of conspiracies around this and all that. And he was a man of God. You know, to take your own life is a pretty cardinal sin. But then there's other people saying that he would read books about suicide and all the rest of it. Which, you know, who's reading books about suicide? It doesn't really make sense. And I don't take a lot of stock in any of these conspiracy theories either, but
no, I mean that to me is a real reach. I mean, it's interesting that the last track on the record you've picked is an interview, and on that he does discuss his love of the style of music on the basis that it's a secular side of music from church.
I like to do blues as a reflection on a period past and present in black people's lives, you know, because it is the complete negative, or the other side, the secular side of the religious music that we had in our church.
It reminds him of the music he loved at church, but it has a secular quality to it that he thinks he can move forward with. And so that is hinting at a wish to get away from that purely sermonising aspect to it. Sam Cooke did the same, you know, because Sam Cooke and the Soul Stirrers were properly singing about Jesus, whereas then he moved on to something that had a much broader appeal.
Yeah.
But we should talk about this record, Craig. These Songs for You, live from 2004. This one landed on the 25th anniversary, year-wise, of his death, right?
Yes, I believe so. There's been tons of reissues that you can get on Spotify throughout the years. But as we were saying before, this is a mix of that live one and some other kind of deep cuts and B-sides and rarities, and
kind of an amalgam, and there are other, he's got 4 kind of prominent live albums. There's the original one live in 72 and in performance, which we spoke about, that this is drawn from. There's also one that was released in 2014 called Live at the Bitter End. Documenting a kind of 1971 performance at a cult New York City jazz bar called The Bitter End.
Yeah, parts of that are on live, parts of that recording are on that record live.
Yeah.
And seeing as we mentioned Jealous Guy earlier on, the version of Jealous Guy from Live at the Bitter End is excellent.
Now I was feeling insecure. You might not want me anymore.
Yeah,
probably even better than the other one.
I like Jealous Guy as a song, John Lennon, but he just absolutely dunks on Lennon, which is takes some balls. First few tracks on this are recorded at Carnegie Hall. There's other tracks that are recorded at Troubadour in Hollywood. There's a track recorded at University of California in LA, and then there's a Bitter End Cafe, as Chris has said. And for me, I can really hear the difference in the audience throughout the tracks as well.
You're talking about the audience there. I really like the liveliness, the noise of the audience in some of these songs. It sounds very, it's very organic. It's very real. You feel really in the moment. The mic is catching so much chatter from the crowd, and it's chatter during the song. It's not just in between with a normal live album. You can hear the excitedness, and it's not disrespectful. It's like enthusiastic chatter.
It's amazing. I think there must be credit, which we'll probably talk about going through the track by track. Credit to those sound guys, because we're talking pretty early on here. You know, it's very, very organic, and it's probably very rudimentary as well for the time. I think they've done an amazing job. Someone had the wherewithal to actually record the audience as well, and I think he knew he was a good enough performer to know which songs, like "You Got a Friend" or something, that's gonna get the audience singing along. But for me, this is a really hard album to sing along to, even though there's so many covers on it, because he always weaves his way in through in different ways, comes in and on like a downbeat rather than, you know, it's just and that's why I think this is a very kind of much of a blueprint for that modern R&B sound, you know, which I guess everyone does and can do now and has done since that kind of 90s era, you know, that kind of Boys to Men kind of thing. It's not just
surely the pinnacle of the genre, right?
Lionel Richie and the Commodore and all that kind of thing, but they kept it a lot straighter because you could sing along to it, either have a knowledge of music or singing to even try and keep up with Donny Hathaway. You know, it's like singing along to Whitney Houston or something like that. You know, that's what I was saying earlier on about female vocalists taking a lot from him too. People like Amy Winehouse, who don't just sing on the beat and rinse and repeat.
So it kicks off with Flying Easy, right?
Mr. Donny Hathaway.
Yeah, it does. And this was the first of the 3 tracks recorded at Carnegie Hall in New York in 1973. Really jazzy, kind of lounge. Could be a bit cheesy, but very cool, and I think very Stevie Wonder in the vocals. It's a nice kind of short intro into this, because it could have meandered from the start, but the arrangement of this album, like I could see this opening up a gig, you know, warming up the band with all those kind of dynamic changes. It reminded me a lot of the Australian band Hiatus Coyote, who are pretty cool. If anyone out there hasn't heard of them,
I find this song vaguely comedic. The opening credits of a 70s quiz show with like a troupe of female dancers and the host walking down the steps and coming out, and if I was to describe it with one word, it would be smooth.
That's Carnegie Hall in New York in the early 70s. That's Austin Powers, you know.
Exactly, yeah. It's vaguely mathy, I noticed, in that kind of vanilla jazz way. You know, Mark, there's that whole breed of like math rock bands that are quite light and jazzy and sort of vanilla, like Boys from Oxford. It's got, you could tell that they've taken some cues from this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the band is hell of a tight, and there's a lot of the jazz influence in that. I was really surprised at how crisp, like you said before, Craig, it's really crisp and clean, the mix, you know. And one thing I liked about this song is from Extensions of a Man, isn't it, this? And it does veer awfully close to music, which I think is probably what you mean by smooth as well, Chris.
Yeah, further down in my notes, I said this kind of thing's got a lot to answer for elevator music and all the rest of it as well.
But it really shows off how fucking great his piano playing was, man. The guy could play, you know. He couldn't just sing; he could also play, and he really goes for it on a lot of the songs in this. And for me, that's just impressive as his voice all the time.
Valdez in the Country. I mean, this also sounds like a quiz show to me, at least to start with, or a background track from a scene in the original Charlie's Angels. You remember that kind of thing? I mean, I have to say, I find this kind of music emotionally totally pointless. It's like the loading music when I'm waiting for a proper song to load. This
is exactly where I wrote. Really shows off Donny's range, because it's quite Latin.
I like this version of it because it's also an extension of a Man. The first 3 tracks are actually, it feels like a jam. I think it probably feels like that on the record as well, to be honest. There's some nice sounds on it. The keys, the sound of the keys are really nice. There's that R&B groove on the bass is fucking cool, man. But
I think the tune is cool. Like if you break it down into those parts and put it in an elevator, you can totally hear that. But hearing this live done by this band who are right in the pocket, I think it's cool. I think it's a cool track. Well, the live version anyway.
I think it all starts to make more sense to me on Someday We'll All Be Free, the third tune.
Just don't let my spin get you down.
As I said, I don't find it a particularly moving song, but I do at least understand it and start to get an idea of what this band are doing, what this guy's doing. Maybe this is the kind of sound you grow into when you start knotting sweaters around your shoulders and enjoying brandy and cigars. It's that kind of tune to me.
I don't know, it's been covered by everyone from Jay-Z to Aretha Franklin.
No, I think this song is a classic. I think the arrangement and this is brilliant. The piano takes centre stage, and it's just, I've written here, the piano sound is delicious and his voice in it is fucking great. The band are just tight though. Like, he leads them. He's a really great band leader, and this record really highlights that as well. Obviously you can tell in the recordings that he's good at arranging stuff, but you can hear him actually leading the band, much in the same way that you would get James Brown or hit the button, Chris, the Prince button. It takes like a lot of these people who are, I guess, quote unquote prodigies like that, and who've been studying music from a really young age, become band leaders essentially. He shows all of that on this record. I think it's the staccato sections in this song, this version of this song has some really great drum fills in them as well, I think.
Yeah, it's good. So this was written by a guy called Edward Howard for Donny, and he explained, this is a direct quote from him, this is after his diagnosis with paranoid schizophrenia. He said, what was going through my mind at the time was Donny, because Donny was a very troubled person. I hoped that at some point he would be released from all of what he was going through. There was nothing I could do but write something that might be encouraging for him. And apparently, according to his wife, this is the one that you talked about earlier on, where he broke down when he heard the recording of it, Chris.
Yeah,
I like this song a lot as well. It's a big song. It's showing off his chops here on the piano, and it's and when you think about this being live and the band being as on fire as they are too, it's very, very impressive. But that's the last of the Carnegie Hall ones. And like I say, everyone's used, covered or sampled this song, everyone from Jay-Z to Aretha, so it's probably something that people will have heard but don't know that it's Donny Hathaway, which is, I think, quite symptomatic of a lot of his music or music at some point.
That, yeah.
I think John Legend did a version of it recently as well.
Yeah,
I believe I read that somewhere.
That's what I'm talking about, modern R&B. You don't get more modern R&B than John Legend, on Smooth FM.
There's great and great, some misunderstood. They get told to wait. Some are just no good. Similarly just fade. Some are misunderstood.
So you then move on to some stuff from live. I will say the stuff that comes from live, I think the kick drum in particular sounds fucking great on that record. You've Got a Friend.
You just
As a song in general, I think it's pure weak sauce. I've never liked that tune. It doesn't do anything for me. Although this version of it, when I think it's the audience that are singing along as opposed to backing singers, it's fucking gorgeous. That is, as much as I don't give a shit about the song itself, hearing the audience singing along with him like that and him just sort of then almost dropping down to being a backing singer to them is kind of like goosebump raising. I'll give it that.
That's exactly what I was talking about earlier on, about how he undulates or whatever. So this song needs no introductions. Carole King, James Taylor, even McFly covered it and had a #1 UK hit with it, which I didn't know until this morning. But what's so good about the live version, like Chris is saying, is that the crowd are doing it straight, and then he just lays back into it and does the backing singing, the hype man. He leans into it, and it makes it a really special thing, and it is a very special song. It's my favourite version of that song. You know, it's not as smooth as like a James Taylor version of it, but it's a really special song, and it captures the feel of being at a show with him. I've got enough, like, everything both of you guys have said is exactly what I've said in my notes as well. His voice really suits the song probably better than I think anyone else's does, but it's like the crowd singing along gives it this really organic, like, live feel, which we've spoken about live records quite a lot, and a lot of them are very manufactured, right? Even try to manufacture moments like this sometimes. Getting this on record is something truly special, to be honest, and the band are obviously brilliant, they're on it, but yeah, it's a crowd that really, really make this song something else.
Fucking crowd are good, by the way. There's bits in it where things like the instruments drop down quite a bit, and the tempo, you can imagine them drifting. If you've ever watched a crowd try and sing a song at a football match where they're about 20 fucking seconds ahead of the backing track, right? And this is because this is a black audience, right? Because can you imagine a white audience trying to sing to this when they can't keep a fucking beat, man? This audience is...
It's in perfect key as well. You know, they're right in tune.
Comes back to the gospel thing though, right? It does. It comes back to that gospel, that religious experience that you have in church, you know, that's like quite a foundational thing in black communities, right? And
yeah, good observation. It's true, yeah.
It's the ultimate training ground, yeah.
He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, the next tune.
But I am strong enough to carry him.
This isn't an improvement for me on the Hollies version. It misses the melodic hooks in favour of the kind of gospel process, so there's a lot of his style of singing pushed into this song, and that's fine, he's got the voice to do it, but as a result of that, he takes the central melody in directions that I think that are much less rewarding and less effective than that Hollies original.
But I'm strong enough to carry him. He ain't heavy, he's my brother.
And I think it could have been a lot better.
I think he made it more religious, like we were just talking about. It has a kind of religious kind of resonance or something to it. I remember this, Chris, you probably do as well. It was in like a beer commercial.
Oh yeah,
like in the 80s or something. It was in like Rambo Free as well. Anyway, I like this version. I think it's good because there's so many versions of it. This is just like a different one, and I don't feel the Holy Spirit or anything. I just hear absolute class, you know.
I'm kind of in the middle. Like when I saw this and I went to listen to it, I was expecting to get the same almost righteous experience that the Hollies original gives you. You know, the way that the way that melody carries that song is pretty fucking good, right? It is a very, very good bit of writing, and he does take it in a completely different direction. And I was a bit disappointed that it does miss that melodic force that the original has. However, the richness of his voice really suits this song. And there's a lot of feeling in his performance, which I really, really liked.
No burden is he too bad. Wished I could this evening, y'all. We'll get there.
And again, his piano playing is just unbelievable. Often it's not talked about. Even people talk about him, man. I think his piano playing is not talked about enough.
This is where the piano playing got a bit grating on me, kind of thing. I don't know if you play piano, Mark, but there's a couple of kind of tricks you can do, just kind of going up and down the scales and showing off. And there's some stuff in this version that makes me question if he's actually on the piano on this one, or if there's someone else in the band who's just going moik on it. And I don't know.
Yeah, perhaps.
This doesn't sound like his style. Like the vocals are insane. You can hear the difference in the crowd noise at this point. It's a different venue, I think. But his vocal control's amazing as well. Apparently one of his big heroes was Liberace, which he wouldn't kind of put together tune, but when you hear all these really, really fast going up and down those scales and all those frilly bits, that's one of my bugbears with this album, is it gets a bit of a one-trick pony at times. That's why I prefer him on the electric piano, because it just suits his playing style more, but it's me just being snobby probably.
It's like an observation, interesting observation.
Another cover that I think's inferior, so I'm not sure how I feel about it, is What's Going On.
Mother, mother, there's too many of you right, yeah. Brother, brother, brother.
It just makes me want to hear the original. It makes me want to hear Cyndi Lauper's version. I get, the original song's fine. It's never been one of my favourites, but this one I don't think is as good as it, and I'm just a little bit.
I think at Christmas time he got Now That's What I Call Music 70s, and then just got the hit covers, and it's
all the hits.
Yeah, we're talking about Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, obviously, and this is where that lecky piano, and you can actually hear the audience again in this, because this is such an important song.
We don't need to escalate. War is not the answer.
You can tell he's thinking of Marvin Gaye and his performance of the original and paying tribute to it. He's not doing a Donny Hathaway thing. He's not going too left field with it like he does on the next one that we're going to talk about. It sounds different because there's not a proper piano on it as well, so you can hear more guitar on it. It's a bit overpowering at times, but it's live, so I guess you can forgive that. And you can hear he's really off the mic as well. I think this is a show of respect to Marvin Gaye. We've talked about Stevie Wonder saying when Donny covers your song, it's kind of not your song anymore. And to take a song as massive as What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, and as important a song as that was, it's a good performance. Not as good as the original, and I don't think it should have been, and he knew that.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. The thing I did like about it though was the live jam band nature of it, the big free jam in the middle with him leading on the keys and that big fat bass. It's just fucking hell, man. That is tasty, But it isn't as good. I don't think it's overall. It's not really a patch in the original, but it's a really good version of it.
Well, as if to take Stevie Wonder up on his offer, track 7, Yesterday.
All my troubles seem so far away.
The Beatles did an okay cover version of this, but the Donny Hathaway new original version is superior. I think this is a really good cover. I'm not a massive fan of Yesterday. Don't really give a shit about it. Never really did that much for me. He, as you said, Craig, takes us in a much more Donny Hathaway direction, and he ends up owning it for me.
Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say.
It's much more emotionally engaging. It lends itself beautifully to his voice and range. He's pitched it just right. The slower tempo works really well, and it really lets him explore the ends of the notes as well, to play with them a bit, because he's got the time with that slower tempo. Yeah, I think it was a really good choice and really well handled.
Yeah, you don't get songs much bigger than this. It's the Beatles, so it takes some balls to go in and make it your own. Maybe culturally this would have been quite a white song, and then to take it in a very and to be so beloved by a black audience kind of thing. Obviously doing covers has been a staple of his live shows, which were probably quite long back then, back in the day, and it was the days when bands would probably play standards and read music, and so you could get any old ringer in to come and play the bass, and it was up to Donny to be the star and do his thing over that standard. And I imagine Yesterday would have been a standard. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a song that's been covered a lot and still gets covered a lot. It feels loungy, this take, laid back for me. I like how the piano and the guitars anchor the song and stick to the original melody, but let it breathe even more than the original, because it's quite a slow song anyway. And his voice is just, it's the icing on the cake. I love the original. I love the Beatles. We've spoken of this before. I think this does it justice for sure, man.
Yeah, that's like draw a bath and just relax. It's a beautiful vocal.
That's kind of the vibe of this album in general. Superwoman, the 8th track, it's by Stevie Wonder, I believe.
Our love is an end. Though you say now you have changed.
Yeah, it is, yes. It's even get the same kind of weird trippy keyboard sound at the start, which Stevie Wonder uses on the original.
Well, funnily you say that, because I do think the first minute of this is the best part of it. I like it when they're goofing about leaning into the song. It's quite cool and surreal. I don't give a fuck about the tune though. It's technically well performed, but I am completely unmoved by it. It doesn't connect on any level.
The original's quite peppy and upbeat, not super upbeat, but it is faster for sure. I'm not entirely sure I like this version of it either, to be honest. I mean, his voice is great and the band are awesome, but I think the original just has a bit more going for it in terms of...
Yeah, I wasn't familiar at all, to be honest, with the original, the Stevie Wonder, but it was a two-parter. It was one of those kind of concept things where the record changed sides.
Mary wants to be another movie star, but is that really in her mind? And all the things she wants to be, she needs to leave behind.
And this version, the Donny Hathaway version, took bits and pieces of it. And I think what is it he says at the start is that our rendition from the Blackpool of genius. And obviously, him and Stevie Wonder are very similar artists and both just absolute weapons at what they do. So you can hear respect in this as well, much like the Marvin Gaye. And I'll bet Stevie Wonder would have really enjoyed this. He would have been hearing things that he maybe considered before, you know. And again, it's taken some big old balls to fuck around with a song by someone like Stevie Wonder. So yeah, nice and chill. It's not my favourite part of the record either. That clippy, cloppy donkey hooves kind of bit that goes in the middle just always kind of throws me out. But this was I think this is the only one that was recorded at the UCLA, so it does sound a bit different, and you can actually tell on the recording. So this is an album I like to listen to in headphones and like lean back, and you can really hear that the crowd is different. I don't know if that's a California thing or I don't know what it is. Yeah. But yeah, you can hear the crowd is different. So yeah, maybe that's why it just doesn't land for us.
A Song for You by Leon Russell. This is from the In Performance live album.
I've been so many places in my life and time. I've sung a lot of songs.
I think this is one of the highlights here. It feels authentic, very heartfelt. It's got some really nice bluesy descents in it and a great delivery. It's quite cheesy, but I think in the sort of sense of being an effective genre piece, you know, in the same way as you can make a zombie film that's got absolutely nothing in it but is a very good genre movie. I think this is a very good genre piece.
And I'm singing this song to you. I know your image of me is what I hope to be.
It's not too far away from the original, but this is a much more of a gospel-like quality. I think Leon Russell's vocal is, I think it's like Marmite, personally.
You taught me precious secrets, all the truth, withholding nothing. You came out in front and I was hiding.
He sings it way better, like significantly better than Leon Russell. This has also been covered so many times, but this version is probably close to definitive for me, just because his voice, like I said, gives it that gospel quality, which he really owns it as a result.
Yeah. This is a definitive version for me, and this is another one of my kind of gateways into Donny Hathaway, and I'd probably suggest to, if you don't want to just start with, I guess it's covers again, but this is where his kind of piano theatrics are kind of used to the best effect. I was saying about that kind of Liberace influence that he had. This is more, sounds a bit more classical on all that descending stuff. That opening line, that trickle. It's just iconic, I think, and it's got that gospel drama. It's like it's deep and it's heavy, but it's also quite light-hearted in this live environment as we're hearing it, and you can tell that by the audience, because you can tell it's like a real audience favourite. But yeah, as you said, Mark, everyone in the Dug has covered this song, but this is in the Donny style, and it's a classic.
Sack Full of Dreams, 10th tune, also from In Performance.
I've got a dream for the world. Peace in the rivers and
The tune's got an interesting wee bass line, but for me that's about it.
Great title, Sack Full of Dreams.
Yeah. I think it's fine. It's not one that I would often come back to be honest. If I was going to listen to it again, it's great vocal performance. It's quite laid back, Sunday afternoon listening, I think.
He calls out a guy, Gary McFarland, who wrote it, who I think I went to primary school with. Sounds like it.
Calls him out versus shouts him out, because I feel like calls him out, it's like
Gary McFarland, get to your bed.
You're fucking getting it.
I'm outrode you. But yeah, great control on this, and this is again coming right back to that blueprint of modern R&B. And a reason I think that none of us are really gelling with this one is because we've heard it so much before.
with no place to go. Can they learn to understand?
It's just smooth as hell, and it's got kind of jazzy at points, and that's what, you know, John Legend does or something like that. It's just stuff you hear in the background on the radio all the time.
Not like the next one, Bongos Motherfucker, track 11, Little Ghetto Boy, fucking bongos everywhere, man.
Will you spend your days and nights in a pool room? Will you sell caps of madness to the neighborhood little ghetto boy? You already
Absolutely gorgeous little piano flourish at the start, by the way. What a fucking beautiful little thing that is.
Will you spend your days and nights in a pool room?
The song's fine. It's got a really blaxploitation vibe to it. You know, it's like it's the scene from the blaxploitation movie where they're doing the character's backstory. You know, the tough upbringing backstory. It's the backing track to that. It's decent. It's good at what it is. I don't know. It's maybe just not for me.
I really like it, man. The vocal is smooth and silky. The walking bass line is really groovy, which just demarks it as being given that blaxploitation vibe, because it has that kind of swagger and bass. I could hear the influence on a lot of modern R&B probably most clearly from this song, and there's a lot of songs where you can hear that, but this kind of rung.
That's interesting. This is the most Stevie Wonder for me. This one sounds the most Stevie Wonder, to be fair. And the band are right in the pocket on this one. Guess you have to be when it's bongo madness.
Yeah, totally. See the harmony bit around 3 minutes, man. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, his daughter won a Grammy for the cover of this.
Little ghetto boy playing in the ghetto streets. What you gonna do when you grow up and have to face?
And we said before, she's been up for 10 Grammys and won 5, so she's doing all right and from pretty good stock. She can do some really insane things with her voice. I watched a video. It's an effect called overtone, which is singing multiple notes at once and forming chords. Pretty mad. It runs.
Done that in the show before, I think.
It runs in the family.
Mark does that on the show. Mark's got a really bassy voice, but he's also Vicky. Vicky isn't a person. Mark can do a second high voice above his low voice.
Welcome
different Scottish accents.
to the Unsung Podcast. Sorry, Vicky. Not sorry, Mark.
It saves us on money. We have to split the
royalties.
Yeah,
quote unquote royalties.
Track 12. Let's get serious. I love you more than you'll ever know.
Play the backbeat home. If I ever leave you, you can say I told you so.
Already mentioned that I like the album version of this. This is from In Performance. This is fucking fantastic. What a great intro and arrangement. The snare hits alone just ring out forever. You can just trip out just listening to the decay of the snare. It's pure class, so much space in the tune. I would categorise it as doom soul. This version of it seems slower and warmer and druggier and darker than the album version. The other players in this are so understated but incredibly effective as well, especially this take on it.
More than you'll ever know. More than you'll ever know.
Top shelf tune, and this is also, as I said, where I really hear Portishead finding a lot of their inspiration, that doom soul thing.
It's straight up shagging music.
Yeah, I was getting like the sort of back, like the end of the night aching back room of the club sort of vibes.
What clubs do you go to?
like
Exactly. Fucking hell.
I think like a blues club. I'm thinking a blues club basically. It's
A pint of ketamine.
yeah, basically. It's got some like lovely chord progressions. It always has done, but this verse of the song really lets them shine. The song weeps in that old bluesy kind of way, and I really like that. The bit when it picks up around 3 minutes, it kind of brings a little bit of a more hopeful vibe, but then it kind of goes back down again into this sort of.
I think
sad.
it just had to be there, otherwise you would just be in that drugged out zone. Man, it's where it's straight up shagging music, so you need to change your tempo when you're when you're doing the full sex. Change your tempo every now and again. But yeah, that bass line out. There is a great Amy Winehouse version of that where they use like a synth bass on it. Gives it more of a modern feel. Nowhere near what this is, and especially live, this is just, imagine being in the audience for that. It'd be like being at the club with Mark and Vicky at the same time.
Yeah.
That's the same person.
You can tell I don't like clubs.
Yeah. The Ghetto. This is from live. This is a long take, a long cut.
It's double as long as the original.
This is one for the fans. It's been a long hang already on the album, but this is 12-minute version of The Ghetto. I think it's
with extra congas.
Yeah. I think it's obscenely good. It's overblown, of course. 12 minutes, but you got to admit, this is when you can hear the band are on fire. And we're hearing this recording technology from 50 years ago, and the band are playing live, not without their flaws, but imagine the payoff if you were seeing that at a gig. It's a head bopper, but it's a very serious song as well. It's a big song for him, and it kind of defines soul music, I think, and he calls it out in Conga Town or whatever. It's like, we're going to the percussion side of town, and he just lets the guys take it away. And with some good cans on, the audience sound and everything, you just feel like you're at the show. So last shout out to those sound guys, because they kicked it out the park on this one, I think. But Chris hates it.
Yeah.
It's fine, man. It's a big jam.
This is like the intersection of like jazz and soul, isn't it? This version of this song.
Yeah, but if
You know?
you wouldn't put this in the album, you put it on a live album to be like, this is what it's
Yeah,
like being at a Donny
absolutely.
Hathaway gig, and you would have a big long jam, probably the last song.
I want to take issue with your metaphor of kicked it out the park. I feel like the phrase is knocked it out the park because you want to be hitting a home run, whereas kicked it out the park just seems like you're really
Skied
fucking
it.
bad at football.
You skied it. Tore down to the fucking stand.
Stole the ball, which means something totally different.
It's the kind of thing when, like, when a bad boy comes along and kicks your ball away. Anyway, and the album finishes with an interview, which is 3 minutes or under 3 minutes, and it's really nice actually.
It is, mhm.
Some really interesting ideas just condensed into this that talks about going from lowest blues to highest symphony, which I thought was a really interesting turn of phrase to refer to. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure he's not being disparaging of the blues, but it does have poignancy. I mentioned the secular side of music from church. He also talks a bit about his love of country music and about country music being that white branch off from the blues, where they simplified it, where white folks simplified it.
Well, I'm a country and western freak. So I'm reflecting back on my cowboy days. Plus, I dig the simplicity, which is the white side of the black heritage, where they branched off from us.
And it's nice.
True.
It's quite an endearing little bit. It's unusual to have it included here, to have a 13-track album musically and then finish with a wee mini interview. And it must be on there because folks that knew him felt there was something in that little interview that was really, really worth hearing. So I'd encourage folk to give it a chance, yeah. To sum up, from my perspective, the one thing I've really noticed about Donny Hathaway is that in the lead up to this episode, I've had it on around other people, and their reaction has been almost unanimously one of pleasant surprise. So even though clearly I'm kind of lukewarm on this particular record, I was impressed at the reaction of folks that were hearing it passively. I think it goes without saying that he is an absolute stick-on candidate for Unsung as an artist, definitely. That case has been made convincingly. Am I convinced that this is the right record? Honestly, no. I would have probably chosen the eponymous one, or maybe Live. There's too many cuts in this that I really just, not only they didn't just pass me by, I found them pretty weak, especially compared to the original versions of them, but I am absolutely certain that he needs to go in for his body of work, for his talent. So I'm not going to split hairs. If I need to get behind this album to make sure he's included in our canon of great unsung artists and albums, then so be it.
I completely agree with Chris. I would have went with Live personally. It's so much more succinct, just as good a representation of his talents, just in a much more direct way. I think this album does get bogged down in more of his jammier songs and jammier moments, which is fine.
The only thing is, if we'd done that, we wouldn't have got I Love You More Than You'll Ever Know.
That's true.
You know what I mean? That's the thing, and for me that is the absolute standout track, so I'm trying to bear that in mind as well.
But you don't get jealous, guy, as well. Yeah, that was my toss up really. And as I was saying at the head of the show, it was a reason doing like a reissue because it had been out of print for, this was like a compilation almost in 2004. Like, who cares? But this is like if people listening to this are going to get turned on to Donny Hathaway, this is quite a good representation of what it would have been like. It's got those famous covers on it, maybe not all of them. It's got some of his own, but I don't know. I just like kind of lying back with the headphones on and feeling like you're there. So that's why this one made the cut, just because it was a bit denser for you guys. I know you do your research on all the albums, but this is one that's just a nice snapshot of what this guy was about.
I'd like to revisit him at some point, but we probably won't, so this would go in for me.
Mm-hmm. All right. It's a fine choice, Craig. I'm really, really pleased you brought it to the table. It's one that, just his story, just the missed opportunities, the lost potential, man, it's fucking devastating, really, when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it certainly seems like a musician's musician kind of thing.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he would have stayed that, though. That's what I'm getting at. I think this guy had breakthrough potential, he just never got to realise it.
Yeah.
He will remain a musician as a result.
Yeah, true of a lot of those kind of artists as well, but luckily he managed to avoid disco, which he probably would have been great at.
The Nexus.
Yes.
That's what's next.
Mm-hmm.
A complicated series of connections between different things.
Why tell us who it is and who picked it?
This week, Mr. Kenny Bonella was drawn out the pot, and he had chosen Sean Lenine. And I correctly guessed at the time, that's got to be a rugby player. And it is indeed a rugby player. A guy who moved from New Zealand to the UK, played in a bunch of teams here, ended up being quite prominent for Scotland, and then went on after his career to edit rugby magazines and things like that. So, you know.
And manages the Scottish Rugby Union team.
Yep. So we're going to nexus Donny Hathaway to Sean Lenine. And Craig, you are up first.
So I had no clue who Sean Lenine was. Despite appearances, I'm not a rugby player.
A rugger bugger.
Okay, I've tried to go Cusack on this again, like last time. So Donny Hathaway tragically passed away at the age of 33 from an apparent suicide where he fell from the 15th floor of the Essex House Hotel at the southern border of Central Park in New York City. The Essex House was originally a housing complex known as Navarro Flats, named after its developer, Jose Francisco de Navarro, between 1882 and 1884, which is essentially a failed project and closed in the 1920s. New developers began construction literally the day after the Great Wall Street crash of 1929, meaning it didn't actually open again until 1931, where it was finally called Essex House. Then changed hands a number of times over the years, with Marriott buying it, Japan Airlines buying it, Westin Hotels, Strategic Hotels and Resorts, and more. And it got tricky for one buyer, though, a Chinese company called Anbang Insurance Group, a Chinese-based insurance company who purchased Strategic Hotels and Resorts, which included 15 hotels in a deal worth $6.5 billion. Where it got tricky for Anbang, though, was that they lost $1 billion after they were forbidden by the US government to sell the Hotel Del Coronado in San Diego, the second largest wooden structure in the States. The US didn't want them to sell to foreign investors due to its adjacent location to the naval base in Coronado, thinking there would be spies or something, I don't know. Now, this hotel itself could have taken me down loads of rabbit holes for the Nexus. It was a bit of a Hollywood playground back in the day. It had royals and presidents and film stars and the like. Lots of significant kind of wartime history. It's been in films like Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe, and even featured in music like Dashboard Confessional song Stolen, which Mark might be familiar with.
I've never listened to Dashboard Confessional.
Oh, I just thought that would be your jam. I've never listened to him. I've never even heard the song.
So did I. I thought that was a fucking certainty, man.
That is your Dashboard Confession. But the Nexus is not here to please Mark. It's more of a Cusack thing. So let's get to the matter at hand. And I'm sure you know where this is going.
Nazis.
So the Coronado Naval Base is kind of infamous for one specific reason. It's its shape. That of all things, Google Earth is responsible for outing and essentially cancelling an entire building. So Time magazine named this in their top 10 Google Earth finds of all time. And can you guess what the shape of this building is?
It's either a swastika or Hitler's Todger.
No, it's definitely a swastika. So we got there to the Nazis. So as is a naval base, it was built in the 60s or something, no planes ever flew over it. So when Google Earth and other map services came around, they didn't really plan for that. If you're in front of your computers right now, just check it up. It's the Coronado Naval Base. The first thing you'll see is just an egregious design. It's done by an architect called John Mock, and the barracks are on the shore of the San Diego Bay. It's technically 4 structures that are all L-shaped buildings, and then 2 smaller structures.
I'm Googling it right now. Holy fuck.
Can you see that, Mark? It's an undeniable swastika. Right down.
Absolutely.
It's right down to the fact that the symbol is actually rotated 45 degrees off north, which is the exact way that the Nazi party displayed the symbol after appropriating it from the Buddhist symbol and Eastern symbols, where it was a symbol of good luck, obviously. So the Navy denied this, of course, but they also promised to put up nearly $1 million to camouflage it from the aerial view. So the mythology around it's quite fascinating. And the idea that a building can be cancelled, I think, is just hilarious.
Give that building time, because like Louis C.K., it'll work its way back.
It'll come back
Well,
round.
they never actually camouflaged it or fixed it. I think
Like
they,
Louis C.K.
I think he's touring soon in the UK.
He is touring soon. Big ginger swastika.
Okay, so the mythology around it's pretty fascinating, just like how fascinated I am in the concept of buildings being cancelled, which I just find hilarious. So cancelled buildings is my next Nexus jump. Anyway, another building that was almost cancelled but wasn't fixed went up was the Forsyth Bar Stadium in Dunedin, New Zealand, a place more Scottish than Scotland. Dunedin means Edinburgh in Scots Gaelic. The river there is called the Water of Leith. There's a statue of Rabbie Burns in the main square, or the Octagon as it's known. The Highlanders play at Caledonian Park, and it has a record of having the world's steepest street. The reason for that is it was kind of settled by the Free Church of Scotland. It was ran by Rabbie Burns. Rabbie Burns' nephew, and he then employed a guy called Charles Kettle to plan the tune. Kettle's instructions had been to reproduce so far as possible the characteristics of Edinburgh in Scotland. The Guinness Book of Records have named it the world's steepest street, and it was planned without proper topography. Some back and forth between a street in Wales and one in San Francisco, but Baldwin Street in Dunedin is on where a lassie actually died going down it in a wheelie bin. So that wins in my book. I'm not even kidding. Poor lass. But back to the cancelled building thing. I know this is long-winded, so I'm going to get through this as fast as I can. What makes that stadium is it has a roof made of EFTE, or ethylene tetrafluoroethylene. Same as, the Eden Project in England, that domey thing. Mm-hmm. And it's the world's first fully covered grass pitch. And the roof should have been angled to face north, like the swastika building, to catch the southern hemisphere sun, but it wasn't. Highways were diverted, it was way over budget, tons of backlash, building was cancelled. It's in the middle of nowhere, the end of the world, but it got built anyway, and Elton John opened it, who also played piano originally on He's Not Heavy, He's My Brother, that Donny covered, that we talked about. And it's all about a wee Scottish lassie who was carrying her brother, as described in the Parables of Jesus by the moderator of the Free Church of Scotland. I also saw Aerosmith and Pat Benatar play there, and it was good, but that's another story. Another thing that happened there was the Rugby League World Cup in 2011, where the stadium hosted 4 games and featured New Zealand as a host country. Who won that year? It was New Zealand, otherwise known as the All Blacks. I was going to do a whole bit on the haka, but it's went on a bit too long. An All Blacks player by the name of Terry Lineen played 35 matches for the All Blacks, including 12 internationals between 57 and 1960. And Terry Lineen had a son, former Scotland international rugby player Sean Lineen. There you go.
Jeez, oh, wow.
That's
journey.
Dense. Yeah.
From Hollywood to New Zealand back to Edinburgh.
Via a wheelie bin. Mark?
Mine isn't that long, but it is actually quite interesting. So Donny, as we've spoken about, he was very close friends and collaborated with Roberta Flack. Roberta Flack in 1999 she toured South Africa, and her final performance was in Johannesburg, and it was attended by President Nelson Mandela, who didn't die in prison in the 80s, despite what some people might think.
Yep.
A couple of years before that gig, Nelson Mandela was awarded the Freedom of the City of Edinburgh. And I decided I went down a wee bit of a rabbit hole on this, right? So it's actually really difficult to find a list of the people who have Freedom of the City of Edinburgh. For some reason, on the Glasgow City Council website, you can find an entire list dating way back to the 1800s of every single person that's ever been given the Freedom of the City of Glasgow, but you cannot find the entire list for those in Edinburgh.
It's because who's on that they don't want us to know about?
It's redacted.
There's a few people in the Glaswegian one that probably shouldn't be there as well. But
Louis C.K.
Now, this is when it kind of got quite interesting for me. So if you go to Sean Lineen's Wikipedia page, it says he's been awarded the Freedom of the City of Edinburgh, right? But there's no reference next to it. I did a search and I couldn't find any news articles about it, and all the sites that mention it seem to just have copied that Wikipedia entry like wholesale.
Ah, that's amazing. So we could do that with you, and then it would become fact.
Potentially, yeah.
Nah. You could just stoat into folks' houses and be like, "You check Wikipedia, I'm allowed to be here."
To kind of further add to this mystery, the Edinburgh City Council does have a page on their website which talks about what the Freedom of the City of Edinburgh is, and it lists the living people who have got it. and it hasn't been updated yet. So the first person on that list is the Queen, who's nudied. So she was given it in 1947, and then Chris Hoy in September 2012, Professor Peter Higgins in January 2014, and Squadron 603 of the Royal Auxiliary Air Force in July 2018, but not Sean
Peter Higgs?
Lennon. Yeah, Peter Higgs, sorry, is that Higgins?
As opposed to the Higgins boson.
Yeah, the Higgins boson, yeah, Peter Higgs, sorry, aye, Peter Higgs. Peter Higgs is actually the only person to get that and the Edinburgh Award, and the Edinburgh Award was created in 2007 and was awarded to people who have never been awarded the City of Edinburgh. J.K. Rowling has got the Edinburgh Award as well. But then Peter Higgs is the only person to hold both, which is weird. But yeah, Sean Lennon is not on that list, which is why it's interesting, because he's alive. So they don't so I don't know who got this information, where it's come from, but it's quite interesting nonetheless.
He's either been rumbled or his Wikipedia's been hacked by like kids.
Aye, something like that, yeah.
Alright, strap yourself in, okay? It's going to be a long episode, but it's going to be worth it. You're going on a strange little journey here. Donny Hathaway performed the cover of Yesterday by the Beatles, as we already discussed. The Beatles song, Maxwell's Silver Hammer, contains the lyrics... I fucking
hate that song so much.
Contains the lyrics, Joan was quizzical, studied pataphysical...
science, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Joan was quizzical, studied pataphysical science in the home. Late nights all alone with a test tube.
I could sing the whole song if you want, mate.
Joan was physical. Joan was quizzical. You've thrown me. Joan was quizzical, studied pataphysical science in the home. Late nights all alone with a test tube. That's about...
Whoa, that's what's next.
Yeah, Maxwell's first victim. So, what the fuck is that about? Pataphysical. What the fuck are they talking about? Pataphysics is a really interesting concept. So, it's a sort of satirical philosophy of science, or the science of imaginary solutions as it's been described. It was invented / popularised by a French writer called Alfred Jarry. Since there's a strong vein of absurdist humour to it, there are many definitions kicking around. The number of definitions, in fact, almost kind of becomes part of the gag. One definition calls it a branch of philosophy or science that examines imaginary phenomena that exist in a world beyond metaphysics. It is the science of imaginary solutions. Some perspectives see it as the study of the anomalies that make rules break down, freak occurrences or exceptions. Another quote, pataphysics is patient, pataphysics is benign, pataphysics envies nothing, is never distracted, never puffed up, it has neither aspirations nor seeks not its own, it is even-tempered and thinks not evil, it mocks not iniquity, it is enraptured with scientific truth, it supports everything, believes everything, has faith in everything, and upholds everything that is. That's by Alistair Brocchi. Jarry, the guy who created it, Jarry performs humorously on behalf of literature, which Nietzsche performs seriously on behalf of philosophy. Both thinkers, in effect, attempt to dream up a gay science whose joie de vivre thrives wherever the tyranny of truth has increased our esteem for the lie, and wherever the tyranny of reason has increased our esteem for the mad. That's by Christian Bach in 2002. It's just fucking batshit. The London Institute of Pataphysics was established in September 2000 to promote pataphysics in the English-speaking world. The Institute has various publications, including a journal, and has 6 departments. The Bureau for the Investigation of Subliminal Images, the Committee for Hirsutism and Pogonotrophy. Hirsutism is
Hairiness.
Being really fucking hairy, and it just goes downhill from there. Anyway, a couple of key theories. Mark, here's a word that you introduced me to, syzygy. The syzygy originally comes from astronomy and denotes the alignment of 3 celestial bodies in a straight line in a pataphysical context that is the pun, usually describing a conjunction of things, something unexpected and surprising. There's a thing called a pataphor. A pataphor is an unusually extended metaphor based on pataphysics, as Jarry claimed that pataphysics exists as far from metaphysics as metaphysics extends from regular reality. A pataphor attempts to create a figure of speech that exists as far from metaphor as metaphor exists from non-figurative language. The example given on Wikipedia, the non-figurative would be Tom and Alice stood side by side in the lunch line. The metaphor would be Tom and Alice stood side by side in the lunch line, 2 pieces positioned on a chessboard. The pataphor would be Tom took a step closer to Alice and made a date for Friday night. Checkmating. Rudy was furious at losing to Margaret so easily and dumped the board on the rose-coloured quilt, stomping downstairs. Thus, quote, the Patafor has created a world where the chessboard exists, including the characters who live in that world, entirely abandoning the original context.
I love that. It's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, and this whole philosophy, this whole fucking school of thought, which I think started as some kind of fucking daddiest, absurdist prank, has just snowballed. There's a pataphysical calendar. This is a belter, right? The pataphysical era, EP, began the 8th of September 1873 on Jerry's birthday. There are 13 months of 29 days. Every 29th day is imaginary, except for 2. Right. The months overlap Gregorian months and have names like Haha, Clinaman, Merdre, Absolu, and Az. Sunday is the first day of the week, so it's always a 1st and 8th, a 15th. Every 13th is therefore a Friday. By the way, Friday the 17th is the Jinx Day in Italy, not the 13th. And in Spain and Greece, it's actually Tuesday the 13th. That's the unlucky day, not Friday the 13th. But anyway, each day also has a saint. Our 14th of December is the day of Don Quixote, champion du monde. So yeah, pataphysics is fucking mental, but it's out there, and there's loads of books, and there's institutes. There's a big institute now just been set up for it in Vilnius, and yet the whole thing seems like it was a joke. So it's like a fucking joke taken to the most insane extent, and it's had an influence though on people, right? So especially writers and artists, but genres like science fiction, you'll find a lot of threads of it. One such writer was a guy called Tony Burgess, the author of the Pontypool trilogy, which is ostensibly about zombies. It was also adapted into a film, but it's a world where the virus, the zombie virus if you will, take on infection, was actually spread through language rather than through blood. The movie adaptation revolved around a radio station. A radio play version also exists. Initially, the movie was actually meant to just feature a headshot of the DJ for the entire 90 minutes, as he had various verbal interactions with people around the world and listeners who were reporting back to him, some of whom had contracted the virus because it's verbal anyway. It turned into actually a pretty good movie. It's rated pretty highly. It's like a really interesting little indie horror film. And the Pontypool of the title, and the town in which Pontypool is set, the film's just called Pontypool, that refers to a real town in Ontario. And Pontypool, the town in Ontario, going way back to the original settlers and founder of the town, takes its name from Pontypool in Wales. I guess that's where a lot of them travelled from. Mm-hmm. And in 1985, Pontypool acquired the services of newly arrived New Zealand-born future Scottish rugby celebrity Sean Linnane.
Wow. Get
that fucking Ringy. How about that? That was a fucking monster.
Yeah, it was. I think I aged. Yeah.
It's pateraphorical.
Right. Fucking hell, we got through it. Thanks very much, Craig. Belter of a choice.
No, Walkers. Yeah.
Great, Mark, what are we up to next week?
I haven't a clue, mate.
Haven't a clue. Will we dress that up for the audience, or we just leave this in and be honest?
No, we've got a surprise coming next week.
The deception is complete. Well, yep. I'm going to pick out a Nexus anyway, right? And whatever we decide on, we will at least have a Nexus for it. And that is going to be Emanuel Bronner, as chosen by Catalyze again. Emanuel Bronner. Nice. So let's see what we have to join that to. Alright, some effort. Nice to see you guys. I'm away to think about the Queen in a dark room.
Me too.
Just morning.
Catches.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah.
Bye.